Not even water. You didn't even pass around water.
So I guess just to stay steady with this story, the airline cancels the flight. I'm not demanding an upticket plane. I haven't deboarded the plane. So the airline cancels the flight. What, if any, responsibility do they have for rebooking?
Typically, this is split up in two different directions. Once again, so many airlines will specify that if there's a major weather issue that's preventing them from taking off altogether. Let's say it's a hurricane. A lot of the time, they will probably give you vouchers for food, maybe a voucher for a hotel if you are stranded overnight and they can't get you out until the next day. However, the general idea here is that it was kind of an act of God. There was nothing they could do about it. It would have been actually dangerous for them to take off in a lightning storm or 90 miles per hour winds. So they're going to work very hard on being able to prove the case where the most that they're going to offer you is a voucher, an apology, and get you on the next flight to wherever you need to go. That being said, the second type of circumstance takes place when it's irregular operations. If you ever seen the word IROPs, IROPs, that's kind of industry slang for, something happened that kept us as the airline or this particular aircraft from being able to take off. This would probably include something like flight attendants or pilots running out of time on their contract and not being able to work additional hours for the sake of safety. Or let's say there's a technical issue that's severe enough to impact the safety of a plane. Once I was on a flight where they were having some issues with the landing gear. So I very much appreciate that we didn't take off in that situation because I would have liked to land. So under situations where IROPs are involved, you're a lot more likely to get compensation in addition to accommodations, rebooking, and all of that assistance. Certain circumstances under which you can request a cash refund, cash check, credit card, whatever form of payment you submitted, where they can't just give you credit toward a future flight and say it expires in a year or so. I don't want to go into the specific details of that because, again, it depends on what the technical issue was with the reason why your flight didn't take off. So you'll want to know that case by case. I would strongly recommend looking this up after your incident takes place. Just keep your calm, take as many notes as you can on what you understand. You can also follow up with the airline afterward by reaching out to their customer service email lines and asking them to send you a message for insurance purposes, letting you know the reason, the time, and everything that took place with that flight. For instance, I was on a flight last year that ended up being either seriously delayed or canceled and rebooked. I don't remember now because several things happened with that one flight. But for the purpose of my travel insurance, I emailed American Airlines, I'll state that right there, and had their media team respond back to me, I believe within 24 hours. I said politely that I was looking for a travel insurance claim through my travel insurance, and I needed to have a statement from the airline on what happened. So they stated the time that it was supposed to depart, the flight number, and all of that stuff. They also mentioned what happened on their end. I believe it was some type of a mechanical issue. And because of that, because they didn't have any backup planes available, they then had to delay until the next day when they had a plane available for us to fly. And then they stated the actual time that we landed at my destination. So that's a very it's a non-emotional process. They are going to give you that information because they understand you need it for claims. So it shouldn't be too difficult. It is just more tedious. Another thing to think about in addition to rescheduling the rest of your issues.
So you mentioned, I'll break this into two categories: proactive, reactive, or retroactive. Maybe reactive as well, depending on your temperature for your mood.
Right.
So proactively, flight insurance. Is there any pros or cons or best practices to go through the airlines? I think some of my credit cards, for example, have flight insurance. Do I double down and do both? Like, where's the best insurance for flights?
Sure. Let me start first by telling you what you probably can get away with an airline, even before you touch travel insurance. When it comes to a situation where you are delayed by a significant amount of time, I would say that's 6 hours, 8 hours, or if you are stuck in an airport overnight and there are no other options for you to get out, then you could very well try making a claim directly with the airline after the situation's resolved. I'll give you an example from this past week. I got stranded on my way returning from New York because of the crazy storms that were happening in the Northeast this past weekend. So my flight connected through Houston, and I ended up being delayed by 2 hours on our outbound flight because our plane hadn't arrived at LaGuardia yet. Because of that, I missed my connection in Houston. There were no other options by the time I landed, so I had to stay overnight for until the next morning's earliest, nonstop. You can stand in line and wait for a voucher from the flight attendants. Not the flight attendants, but the customer service agents that will be in the airport. However, I found that a lot of the time, if the lines are super long or if the delay is very unexpected and customer service is being hammered all at once by 180, 300 people all trying to rebook, many on short notice, it's often not worth my time and energy to stand in that line getting more and more frustrated with everyone else. Instead, what I'll do is make sure that I charge everything onto the same credit card that I purchased my travel on. And I'm going to come back to that later because the credit card you use for travel is super important. But make sure you have clear receipts of everything you purchased. Try to make it reasonable. You're not going to rack up $120 steak dinner in the airport with 3 glasses of wine. That's going to be very hard to justify. But it's totally fair if you and each family member got a burger, a drink and fries, maybe a salad or a shake to kind of ease things over. Those are very reasonable and understandable accommodations that you would need. Same for getting an airport hotel. You probably don't want to go to the St. Regis at this point, harder to justify, but you're totally within your rights to find the closest option that feels safe and comfortable for your family. I often like to look for a hotel that's close enough to have a free shuttle so that I can show good faith effort to get back to the airport at a timely manner. Sometimes instead of getting food at the airport, I will also DoorDash something to my hotel room instead. That usually gives me better options. They're more delicious and also gets me out of the airport again. So all of these types of receipts are very understandable to save and then later submit to the airline. This past weekend, when I was stranded in Houston, what I ended up doing was just booking myself one of the airport hotels nearby. I got myself some dinner and I saved all of my receipts for Lyft back and forth. I originally would have had a ride if I had arrived in time. Since I didn't, I saved my receipt for once I returned back to the airport at home and needed a way to get back. Based on all of that, I submitted my receipts with a politely worded explanation of what had happened in the customer contact form on Southwest's website. They'll typically ask you which flight you were on, so you'll need to have your number, the date you were traveling, usually the cities you were supposed to travel between. And once I get started on the body of my message itself, I like to give them a bullet point list of what's happening. This is where I was going. This is why I was delayed. This is what I did about it. I got my hotel, I got my dinner, I got my Lyft, and this is what I'm asking for in compensation. I fly Southwest a lot, so I don't know if this is a best practice for everyone, but something I often say is I would really appreciate being compensated for the dollar amount that is listed in all of these receipts. So in that circumstance, it was a couple $100. However, I would also be willing to take a flight voucher if that's available. And again, you don't have to say that, especially if the money is important to have back in your pocket. That makes a lot of sense. If I had purchased a different ticket to get back, let's say United had a flight from Houston that could get me home later than that latest Southwest flight ran. If I purchased a last minute one-way ticket to get home on United, I would have sent them that receipt as well, because essentially it was either buy a new flight or get that hotel room, right? So these are all reasonable accommodations that most airlines will be willing to consider helping you out with. One major exception I would say to that rule, of course, is if you're flying one of the budget airlines, a Spirit, a Frontier, it's very likely that you will have to argue a lot harder to get compensated. And I would not suggest expecting to get that back necessarily. I would say be pleasantly surprised if it happens. That'd be great. But part of the benefit you get of a $25 flight to Vegas is, things can happen here and there. So those are all best practices, I would say, even before getting into credit card. Let me also come back really fast because I realize you did ask me proactive and retroactive. So let me rephrase. Proactively, one of the best things you can do for yourself is to make sure you're booking your flight with a credit card that has good travel insurance protections built into it. That is something I actually messed up a little bit on this most recent trip. I actually used my Southwest credit card to pay for this flight, but I should have used my Chase Sapphire Reserve credit card because that actually has travel insurance benefits on it. My Rapid Rewards Southwest credit card has baggage delay and lost baggage protection. But since I didn't check a bag and I didn't lose anything on the plane, that wouldn't have covered my hotel room or my food or anything like that. Now, there are a lot of great credit cards out there. We could talk about that for a whole session right there. But I would say stick with a good basic one to start. Make sure you read a number of the guides that are out there. You'll typically hear a lot of the same good ones. On the higher end of things, the American Express Platinum Card, the Chase Sapphire Reserve I mentioned, the Capital One Venture X credit card. These are all premium credit cards that have really good travel insurance protection built in. One of the best mid-tier cards I can recommend is actually the Chase Sapphire Preferred, which is the card that a lot of people have when they think about the Chase Sapphire. This card is only $95 a year, but it comes with better travel insurance, honestly, than many of the other premium credit cards on the market. So essentially with your Chase Sapphire Preferred, in a situation like I described here, let's say I did end up flying a budget airline. I will not name one. If I did fly one that refused to compensate me for my hotel room and wouldn't cover my food or lift or anything like that, I could take those same receipts back to, say, Chase, if I paid with a Chase Sapphire Preferred. And I could say, hey, these are expenses I reasonably incurred due to a situation that was out of my control. And one of the great things about working through Chase or a similar bank that has really good travel protection is, you remember how earlier I said that airlines are not necessarily required to compensate you or make things right in a way that suits your preference if it's due to weather, because essentially the idea there is it's out of everyone's control, so there's nothing to do about it. However, travel insurance takes care of even that, because they understand just because there's a massive storm doesn't mean you're not really uncomfortable sleeping at the airport for 14 hours. So they will cover things like hotels or a ride home. Let's say you're 45 minutes from the airport, maybe you could Uber home or something like that. They'll cover those types of reasonable accommodations for you. Once again, make sure you read the fine print really carefully on the particular card you're using, and you're going to want to contact the airline as well to make sure you know the reasoning behind why that flight was canceled. Because sometimes you may or may not get compensation under certain circumstances, while for others, there's some type of a guideline that must kick in before you can consider being compensated. So for instance, if your bags are lost or delayed, you might have to wait 12 hours or a full day or something like that before you can go out and buy a whole new outfit.
And as we move towards the wrap here, you've hit all my questions. I appreciate you for coming on the show. Is there anything that we missed that the airlines don't want us to know?
Ooh, I will say something that I think the airlines do want us to know. I think they want us to realize that a lot of the time we're in the same situations that they are in, and vice versa. So a little bit of context, a lot of the travel industry was heavily impacted in 2020 when COVID shut down pretty much the whole world. So a lot of the most experienced pilots and flight attendants were offered early retirement packages. Not all of them took them, but more than usual did. So that means a lot of the people we're working with these days, not just in the air, but also on the ground, the ramp agents, customer service, they're all relatively new as well. It's not all of them for sure, but there are a lot more newcomers to the industry than there have been for many, many years before that. So I think being patient is one of the most effective ways of making a difference in this space. Because, I think in that clip we saw, that lady was absolutely justified in being upset, and she did show a lot of restraint. However, the guy she's talking to, whether he has 30 years of experience or not, he literally is not the person who did not give her water on the plane.
Not even water. You didn't even pass around water.
There's a good chance some of you saw this video going around the last few weeks. Well, at least 2.3 million of you have. So this is my mom, and this is me. There's a lot of context missing, so I'm here to fill you in on how we got ourselves into this situation and what has happened since this was posted.
He probably has never met those people before in his life. There's not much he can do other than just stand there and take it, which is really hard. And there's no way he's going to fault her or, put her name on a blacklist or something like that. But just keeping in mind that everyone else is doing the best they can. Sometimes you have to be really persistent. I'll come back to that example I gave you for travel with Southwest. I actually was stranded a number of times over the week between Christmas and New Year's 2022. And I ended up incurring about $1,300 worth of charges between me and my partner for travel that we had to rebook out of our own pockets. Now, literally, I think 100,000 people were impacted during that week of absolute PR nightmare for Southwest. So while I got a quick customer service response, I didn't get a follow-up to my ask about, here are my receipts, what can we do about this? I've thought about it a couple of times through the months and was just too tired to do anything about it. But on Monday, I decided to sit down and fill out the paperwork since I was already doing it for my most recent flight. They responded. They actually told me they're sending me a check for the full $1,300 amount and sincerely apologized for what happened then. So important documentation. I do think a lot of the airlines hope that we will just forget about it. And I would say maybe don't. Just forget about it. And posting about it on social media can be useful if you want some kind of a response. One of the most effective ways you can reach an airline is try to hit them up on Twitter or Instagram or something like that. That will very likely be faster than trying to get through the phone lines if you're in a pinch. Just say, hey, I'm on flight AA1234, trying to get onto flight 5678, stranded in Denver. Can you help me? And that will allow a customer service agent to work with you through the DMs and do their best to get back to you as soon as possible.
Awesome. And more great tips. This is a series, folks. So if there's anything that we missed, please drop your questions and comments below and hit that subscribe button and you'll get featured in a future video. Thanks for coming on the show, Catherine. Please tell the listeners where they can learn more about you.
So you can find me on Instagram, honestly. I just hang out there a little bit too much. It's like my private airport hangout. But you can find me at Catherine Fangirling. That's Catherine, Katherine, fan, Fan, like a sports fan, and just fangirling, like I'm fangirling all over the world.
Like you heard in the video, the air conditioners were malfunctioning, the temperatures were easily in the high 80s, people were stripping down into their underwear, kids were crying, and one girl ended up having a panic attack, throwing up, and nearly fainting in the back of the plane. Shortly after we got back from our trip, this TikTok was posted and went viral.
Treated like animals.